I never thought I'd be the kind of person who goes camping. I grew up in the city, surrounded by concrete and convenience stores, where the closest thing to wilderness was the park 2 blocks from my apartment. But when my company announced a mandatory team-building retreat in the mountains, I couldn't exactly say no. What I definitely couldn't have predicted was meeting someone who would make me question everything I thought I knew about myself, or that I'd spend months afterwards staring at the tent we shared, at the tiny marks he carved into the canvas, counting the nights we had together like they were precious enough to preserve forever. His name was Marcus. I noticed him on the bus ride up to the campsite, sitting 3 rows ahead of me, his head resting against the window as he watched the city fade into forest. He had this profile that caught the afternoon light perfectly, strong jawline, dark hair that fell just slightly over his forehead, and these shoulders that seemed too broad for the corporate polo shirt we'd all been given. I remember thinking he looked like someone who actually belonged in the wilderness, unlike the rest of us office workers who were clearly out of our element. When we arrived at the campsite, our team leader Janet started reading off tent assignments. I was silently praying I wouldn't get stuck with Derek from accounting, who had a reputation for snoring loud enough to wake the entire floor. Then I heard my name paired with Marcus, and something in my chest did this strange little flip that I immediately tried to ignore. I told myself it was just relief at avoiding Derek. Marcus walked over to me with an easy smile, extending his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and I noticed he had calluses on his palms, the kind you get from actually doing things with your hands instead of just typing all day like I did. "Looks like we're bunkmates," he said, and his voice had this low, comfortable quality that made me feel like we'd known each other longer than 30 seconds. "Fair warning, I'm actually looking forward to this. I know that makes me weird." I laughed, probably a little too nervously. "No judgment here. I'm just hoping I don't die from a bear attack or poison ivy or whatever else is out here waiting to kill city people." "I'll protect you from the bears," he said, and there was something in his eyes, something playful but also sincere, that made my stomach do another one of those flips I was definitely not analyzing. We set up our tent together, and I was absolutely useless at it. I kept putting poles in backwards and getting tangled in the rainfly, while Marcus moved with this confident efficiency that made it clear he'd done this 100 times before. He never made me feel stupid about it, though. He'd just gently redirect my hands, showing me the right way to thread the poles or stake down the corners. And every time his fingers brushed against mine, I felt this electricity that I kept telling myself was just static from the synthetic tent material. That first night, we lay in our sleeping bags on opposite sides of the tent, the space between us feeling both vast and impossibly small. The darkness was complete in a way it never is in the city, and I could hear every sound, the wind in the trees, the distant hoot of an owl, Marcus's steady breathing just a few feet away from me. "You still awake?" His voice cut through the darkness, soft and close. "Yeah, too quiet, weirdly enough. I'm used to sirens and traffic." I heard him shift in his sleeping bag. "Give it a few minutes. Your brain adjusts. Then you start hearing all the individual sounds instead of just noise. It's actually pretty amazing." We lay there in silence, and he was right. Slowly, the sounds started to separate and become distinct. I could hear the creak in the distance, the rustle of some small animal in the underbrush, the gentle flap of the tent canvas in the breeze. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus said after a while. "This retreat, it's kind of perfect timing for me. I've been going through some stuff, trying to figure out who I am outside of work, outside of expectations. Being out here, away from everything, it feels like maybe I can actually think clearly." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that made me want to reach across the space between us. "I get that," I said quietly. "Sometimes the city feels like it's moving so fast that you don't have time to actually feel anything. You're just surviving, getting through each day." "Exactly." I could hear the smile in his voice. "I think we're going to be good tent partners." I fell asleep that night feeling something I couldn't name, something warm and unsettling and exciting all at once. The next morning, I woke up to find Marcus already awake, sitting cross-legged at the tent entrance with a small pocket knife in his hand. He was carefully carving something into the interior canvas near the corner, his face focused and peaceful in the early morning light filtering through the trees. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. He looked up, not startled at all, like he'd known I was awake. "Making a mark, one line for our first night. My grandfather taught me this when I was a kid. He said every night you spend in the wilderness is worth remembering, worth counting. Most people go their whole lives without really being present anywhere. This is how you remember you were here, you were alive, you were paying attention." He showed me the single thin line he'd carved, barely visible, but definitely there. A small record of our first night together. Something about it felt sacred, more intimate than it probably should have. "That's actually really beautiful," I said, and I meant it. Over the next few days, the team-building activities threw us together constantly. We were partners in trust falls, which meant I got to catch Marcus as he fell backwards into my arms, his weight solid and real against me. We navigated obstacle courses together, his hand gripping mine as he pulled me over a wooden wall I definitely couldn't have climbed alone. We cooked terrible camp meals side by side, laughing at our burnt hot dogs and undercooked beans. But it was the nights I started living for. Every evening, after the group activities ended and everyone retreated to their tents, Marcus and I would lie in the darkness and talk. Really talk, in a way I'd never talked to anyone before. He told me about growing up in a small town where being different meant being invisible, about moving to the city to escape, but feeling like he'd lost something essential in the process. I told him about my own quiet desperation, the way I'd built a life that looked perfect on paper but felt hollow, how I'd dated women because it was expected, but never felt that spark everyone talked about, never felt truly seen. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus said on the fourth night, his voice careful in the darkness. "Yeah, of course." "Have you ever been in love? Like, really, genuinely in love?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "No," I admitted. "I've cared about people. But love? That thing where you can't imagine your life without someone, where they become essential to your breathing? I don't think I have. Have you?" There was a long pause. "I thought I had once. Turned out I was in love with the idea of being normal more than I was in love with her. Took me a long time to admit that to myself, even longer to admit why." My heart was pounding. We were circling around something big and terrifying and real. "Why?" I whispered. Another pause, even longer this time. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Because I was trying to be someone I'm not. Because I was scared of what it would mean to actually want what I wanted. I could barely breathe." "What do you want, Marcus?" I heard him shift, felt the warmth of his body as he moved closer in the darkness. "I want to be honest. I want to stop pretending. I want to tell you that every night we've been in this tent together, I've had to physically stop myself from reaching across this space between us. The world seemed to stop. Every sound, the wind, the creek, the night birds, all of it faded until there was just his breathing and mine, just the tiny space between us that suddenly felt charged with possibility. Then stop stopping yourself, I heard myself say, and I barely recognized my own voice. His hand found mine in the darkness, fingers intertwining, and it was like every nerve in my body lit up at once. We lay there like that for what felt like hours, just holding hands, and it was the most intimate thing I'd ever experienced, more intimate than any kiss, than any relationship I'd tried to force myself into before. That night, we fell asleep with our sleeping bags pushed together, his arm around me, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat like it was the only sound in the world. And in the morning, I woke up to see him carving another mark into the canvas. But this one was different, deeper, more deliberate. A mark that meant something had changed, something had shifted, something had begun. The team retreat was supposed to last a week, but when Janet announced on day 5 that we'd have the option to extend our stay for another week on our own time, Marcus and I looked at each other and knew immediately what we wanted. Most of the team packed up and headed back to the city, eager to return to their comfortable beds and Wi-Fi. We stayed. Those next days were the most alive I'd ever felt. We hiked during the day, Marcus teaching me to really see the forest, to notice the way light filtered through leaves, to identify bird calls and animal tracks. We'd find clearings and lie in the sun, talking about everything and nothing, his hand always finding mine, our bodies always gravitating toward each other like magnets. At night, we'd return to our tent, and each evening Marcus would add another mark to the canvas. I started to watch for it, that quiet ritual, the way he'd take out his pocket knife and carefully carve another line, his face peaceful and focused. Sometimes he'd let me do it, guiding my hand with his, and those moments felt like we were creating our own language, our own way of saying this matters, you matter. We were here together, and it counted. We kissed for the first time on the 7th night, under a sky so full of stars it looked fake, like someone had spilled glitter across black velvet. We'd been sitting by the fire, shoulders touching, and he'd turned to me and said, "I need to kiss you. I've needed to kiss you since the moment I saw you on that bus. Is that okay?" I didn't answer with words. I just closed the distance between us, and when our lips met, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been but had always been searching for. We kissed until the fire died down to embers, until the night grew cold enough that we had to retreat to the tent, where we held each other and kissed some more, learning the taste and feel of each other, taking our time, savoring every moment. 11 marks, Marcus whispered that night, running his fingers over the lines he'd carved. 11 nights of figuring out who I really am. Who are we when we go back? I asked, the question that had been haunting me for days. What happens when we're not in this bubble anymore? He pulled me closer, his arms strong and sure around me. We're the same people. We're just finally honest versions of ourselves. And yeah, it's going to be scary. People at work will talk, our families might struggle with it, the world isn't always kind to people like us. But I'd rather face all of that with you, being real, than spend one more day pretending to be someone I'm not. We stayed for 13 nights total, 13 marks on the canvas, 13 nights of discovery and vulnerability, and falling in love in a way that felt both terrifying and inevitable. We made love for the first time on the 10th night, slow and careful and filled with wonder, learning each other's bodies the way we'd learned each other's hearts. And afterward, lying tangled together, Marcus carved that night's mark with extra care, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was, that some nights are more precious than others, that some moments deserve to be remembered with special attention. On our last morning, we packed up the tent together, moving slowly, neither of us wanting it to end. Marcus ran his fingers over the marks one more time, 13 thin lines carved into the canvas, a record of the nights that changed everything. "We're taking the tent," he said firmly. "I don't care if it's company property. These marks, this is ours. This is our story." We drove back to the city together, my hand in his the entire way. And when we got back to our regular lives, everything was different and nothing was different. We were still the same people. But now we were people who knew what it felt like to be truly seen, truly known, truly loved. Work was complicated at first. There were whispers and stares, a few awkward conversations with HR about fraternization policies. Some people were supportive, others weren't. But Marcus and I faced it together, and that made all the difference. We moved in together after 3 months, and the first thing we did was set up that tent in our living room, just for one night, lying inside it and counting the marks together. 13 nights that changed our lives, I said, tracing the lines with my finger. No, Marcus corrected gently, pulling me close. 13 nights that let us start living our lives. There's a difference. Now, 2 years later, that tent sits folded in our closet, but sometimes, on anniversaries or difficult days or nights when we need to remember where we came from, we take it out. We set it up and lie inside it, counting those 13 marks, remembering the fear and the courage and the overwhelming rightness of finding each other. We've made new marks since then, not on canvas, but on our lives. We've weathered family drama and workplace discrimination and all the complicated realities of being two men in love in a world that doesn't always make space for us. But we've also experienced joy beyond anything I could have imagined, the simple miracle of waking up next to someone who knows all of you and loves you anyway, of building a life that's genuinely yours instead of one you think you're supposed to want. Sometimes I think about that version of me who got on the bus to that camping retreat, anxious and disconnected and going through the motions of a life that never quite fit. I think about how terrified he would have been if he'd known what was waiting for him in those mountains, how he would have probably run in the opposite direction if he'd known his entire world was about to shift. But I also think about those 13 marks on the canvas, each one a night of becoming more myself, more honest, more alive. Each one a small act of courage, of saying yes to something real even when it was scary, of choosing truth over comfort. Marcus still has that pocket knife. Sometimes I catch him turning it over in his hands, a small smile on his face, and I know he's remembering. We talk sometimes about going back to that campsite, about carving 13 more marks to celebrate how far we've come. But part of me likes that those original 13 stand alone, a perfect record of the beginning, of the moment when two scared men in a tent decided to stop hiding and start living. Love isn't always what you expect. Sometimes it finds you in the wilderness, in the darkness, in a shared tent with a stranger who becomes the most familiar person in your world. Sometimes it's counted in marks on canvas, in nights of whispered confessions, in the courage it takes to reach across a small space and say, yes, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is real. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who goes camping, but I'm grateful every day that I did. Because those 13 nights taught me that the scariest journeys often lead to the most beautiful destinations, that being lost is sometimes the only way to find yourself, and that love, real love, is worth every mark, every moment, every brave choice to be honest about who you are and what you need. Marcus is in the kitchen now, making coffee, and I can hear him humming softly to himself. In a few minutes I'll get up and join him, and we'll start another ordinary day in our extraordinary life together. But for now, I'm lying here, thinking about canvas and knife marks and the way some people count sheep to fall asleep, while others count the nights that mattered, the nights that changed everything, the nights that proved that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. 13 marks on a tent canvas, 13 nights of becoming, and a lifetime of gratitude that I was brave enough to let it happen.